me begin by saying that I am not a constitutional lawyer. I know, shocking. Me, not a constitutional lawyer? I mean, I did do mock trial in high school, and, I was pretty good at it. And one of my fellow mock trial participants went on to become a successful corporate lawyer. So basically, I am okay, no. I'm getting off track. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just an atheist who is happy to live and let live with religious people, provided that we all agree that, say, the separation of church and state is an important central tenet of United States democracy that we should protect at all costs as it benefits everyone, religious or not. Unfortunately, a significant number of highly motivated Christian fundamentalists do not agree with me on that. I mean, other religious fundamentalists like Muslims also don't agree, but the real work here is being done by Christian theocrats who have made it their mission for at least the past 50 years to chip away at the wall separating church from state. I talk about this topic enough, but a few key moments from the past few years. In 2017, I talked about Donald Trump promising to totally destroy the Johnson Amendment, a keystone of free speech and free practice of religion. I also talked about, in 2020, about how religious schools are legally allowed to discriminate against LGBTQ students while public schools are not. So remember that one because it's going to be very relevant in a minute. The latest salvo in the war on democracy is this week's ludicrous pro-theocrat Supreme Court decision. Not to be confused with last week's ludicrous pro-theocrat Supreme Court decision. And also, I should mention, not to be confused with the ludicrous pro-gun decision that came out today, on the day I'm recording this. The Supreme Court of the United States has struck down Maine's ban on using taxpayer money to fund religious schools. Yep, taxpayer money can now fund religious indoctrination. Here's the deal. Maine has a lot of rural, sparsely populated areas surrounding the few urban centers. Rather than spending money and energy to make sure children in those areas can easily access public schools, they allow students to get a scholarship to attend their choice of private school. And that private school can be pretty much whatever the student wants. It can be secular. It can be affiliated with a religious organization. It can even be run by a religious organization, provided that the education they offer is secular, no religious indoctrination. Because, if the government starts paying for children to be indoctrinated within a certain religion, that would violate the separation of church and state. The wall between them would just, poof, disappear in a puff of logic. Two families brought a court case against the state over this, claiming that rule unfairly discriminated against religious schools that indoctrinate children. That case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, which, as you all know, has been tightly packed with religious right zealots, just as Donald Trump promised. And those ultra-conservative theocrats decided that, yes, Maine taxpayers should be forced to tithe to churches. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that this decision was unremarkable, as it reasonably builds upon two previous Supreme Court decisions. Which decisions were those? I'm so glad you asked. They are two decisions that Chief Justice John Roberts wrote. First, there was the 2017 decision, Trinity Lutheran Church of Columbia, Inc. versus Comer, in which a church sued because the government denied them a $20,000 grant to upgrade their playground, as it would mean directly funding religious exercise. Which, considering it's a playground, several meanings there. The Supreme Court found in the church's favor, essentially stating, in the words of Justice Sotomayor in a very angry dissent, that the Constitution requires the government to provide public funds directly to a church. Sotomayor went on to say that the decision slights both our precedents and our history, and its reasoning weakens this country's long-standing commitment to a separation of church and state beneficial to both. That case was cited as precedent in Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue, a 2020 case that involved the Montana legislature attempting to fund religious schools by offering tax credits to people who donated to send kids to private schools, including religious schools that indoctrinate children. The Montana Supreme Court was like, yeah, you can't do that because the Constitution and 200 years of precedent says we can't give taxpayer money to religious indoctrination. Very sensible take, if you ask me. Unfortunately, that decision was appealed to the new batshit theocratic United States Supreme Court, where one Justice John Roberts wrote that if a state funds private schools in any way, it cannot disqualify some private schools solely because they are religious. And all of that brings us to this week, when one Justice John Roberts ruled that Maine cannot discriminate against schools just because they engage in religious instruction. Schools can have a little religious indoctrination as a treat. Most states, that's 37 states and Puerto Rico as of this recording, have on the books some way to fund private schools, which means non-Christian residents in those states, considering that the vast majority of religious schools in the United States are Christian, will now be paying to fund schools that teach students to discriminate against many of them. I'm not being hyperbolic here. Americans United for Separation of Church and State notes that the two schools involved in this particular case discriminate against LGBTQ families, one barring their admission and the other forcing them to undergo counseling and renounce their sexual orientation or gender identity or be expelled. One school's stated educational objective is to refute the teachings of the Islamic religion with the truth of God's word. And now Muslim taxpayers will be forced to fund that school. And yes, it also means that Christian taxpayers will be forced to fund Muslim or Satanic temple schools in theory, if there were enough of them for it to be an actual threat. But, we've seen Republican lawmakers who are pro-gun get gunned down while playing baseball, and they are still pro-gun because they know more often than not, they control the majority. It's their people who have all of the guns. It's their people who have all of the schools who are going to be getting this taxpayer money. It's particularly galling that the Supreme Court says that you will be forced to fund a school that indoctrinates children against your personal beliefs and even against your actual being, while at the same time they have upheld the right of businesses like Hobby Lobby to refuse to fund their employees' health care because it goes against the owners of the business's personal beliefs. Remember when Hobby Lobby bought fake Dead Sea Scrolls and illegally smuggled antiquities out of Iraq? Yeah, good times. I've seen a lot of people, particularly atheists and secularists, say something along the lines of, well, hey, if our taxes are going to fund religious schools, then religious schools should pay taxes. We make that same argument about churches all the time. Well, have I got bad news for you guys? Our taxes have been funding private secular schools for quite a while. Those schools also get huge tax breaks exactly like the religious ones. To truly appreciate how nuts this is, note that not all private schools are just there to provide children in rural Maine with an affordable education without spending hours on a bus. In fact, most private schools are there to provide a better education than the poorly funded public schools for rich families who can afford astronomical tuitions. Here in California, for instance, the average private school tuition is $15,683 per year, with an upper limit of $73,320 per year. I paid less for 4 years of Boston University. The wealthy families sending their kids to these private schools get significant tax breaks for donating that tuition to a nonprofit institution, pulling even more money away from public schools that desperately need it. And the private schools themselves get huge tax advantages as well, including often not paying property tax. which again takes money away from the public institutions that poorer people rely upon. So the downside to this ruling is that church and state are no longer separated in the United States. In fact, you could say it looks like church and state have moved in together and are sleeping in the same room, but, in twin beds, like on the Dick Van Dyke Show, which seems intimate but still chaste, but also that a few nights a week they're pushing the beds together. The plus side, if we can find one, is that at least maybe this will encourage the more liberal states to rethink their funding of private schools. These rulings only apply to states that fund any private school. So if a state doesn't fund any private schools, they can't be forced to fund private religious indoctrination. But it's pretty sad when the only upside to be found here is, wow, we've finally fucked the system up so much that maybe now politicians will notice and try to fix it. And the system in question is educating our nation's children. Man, I'm sorry. I don't know. Talk to your representatives. Donate to groups like Americans United. Like, comment, and subscribe. Take a long walk in the woods and just try not to think about how fucked up everything is.